Welcome to the Invest for More Real Estate Podcast. My name is Mark Ferguson, and I am your host. I'm a house flipper. I flip 10 to 15 houses a year. I own 13 rental properties with a goal to buy 100 by 2023. I'm also a real estate agent. I've been licensed since '01. I run a team of 9. We sell close to 200 houses a year. So on this show, we like to interview house flippers, landlords, and the best real estate agents in the business. So stay tuned for some great shows. If you want more information on my rentals, on the numbers, how I buy properties, check out investformore.com. Hi, everyone. It's Mark Ferguson with Invest for More. Welcome to another episode of the Invest for More Real Estate Podcast. I have another awesome guest today, Daniil Kleyman, who is a real estate investor, as well as he creates software for real estate investors. He became a full-time investor in 2009, has built up an incredible portfolio worth around $10 million in a very short period of time. So we're going to talk about that, how he got started in real estate, and also how his software can help new investors, experienced investors, really help their business. So thanks a lot for joining the show. I'm glad to have you, Daniil. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Mark. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, no problem. Always love to have experienced investors and kind of some different perspectives. You first got started in 2009, but you'd invested a little bit before, well, I should say you became a full-time investor in 2009, but you've invested a little bit before that. How did you first start investing, and what was the first property you bought?
Well, so I was living in New York, and one of my best friends was living in Richmond, Virginia, which is my hometown. And, I was interested in real estate for a while at that point. And he started buying and rehabbing single family homes, duplexes. And that was sort of an easy opportunity for me to get involved because I had, I was working a corporate job. I was making decent money and I had some money to stash away. So I got involved with him and we bought we bought 3 duplexes in sort of a downtown area of Richmond, primarily catering to students and young professionals. And as it turns out, we end up buying them at the very peak of the market in 2006, 2007. But at the time, we didn't know any better, and we paid. Looking back, I never would have made those purchases. We paid market value. There was a ton of deferred maintenance on these properties that we weren't really aware of. There was really no sweat equity that we created after we bought these properties. It was like the dummy way to invest, right? It was the way to invest in which now I look back on it and I'd never do those deals. But they were in a high demand rental area, so even as the market crashed, they end up holding their value, and we've always had them 100% rented. So that's kind of the saving grace on those deals, is that they were at least in the right location, and we didn't lose them when the market crashed.
I would say at least 50% of the people I interview, their first deal, they either lost money or they admit they did it all wrong. But they didn't give up. They didn't stop. They learned from it and they improved the next time. So not surprising. What were you doing? What was your corporate job when you were investing at that time?
I was working in finance in New York. I started off in bond sales, then I did bond trading for a while, and then I ended up working at Bear Stearns. I was doing deal structuring. So I was putting together some pretty complex bond deals that basically no longer exist because the market is different, and the whole landscape has changed. So I was doing a lot of financial analysis and number crunching basically for my day job, and dealing with assets and deals that really only exist in spreadsheets and on the computer. And that's also one of the reasons why I really kind of switched gears, and I love real estate so much more, is because it's something you can touch, you can feel, you can take something, you can improve it. You're not just shoving money around from one place to the other. You actually have the ability to build something that's going to last. So
very, very cool. How did that transition work from going to a full-time corporate to a full-time real estate investor? Was it a slow process? Did you just decide one day you're going to jump into it?
So the market crashed. The company I was working for went out of business, and we got acquired by another bank, by JP Morgan, and for some reason they fired a bunch of people and kept me, which I still don't know why. But at that point, I realized that I really just didn't want to be there anymore, and I started secretly hoping to get laid off. And it was like a scene out of Office Space where the guy shows up to work late and starts scaling a fish at his desk. I mean, that's kind of what I was doing. Is I was really trying to send signals to my managers that my heart wasn't in it anymore. So after a couple of months of misery and just total boredom, they actually laid me off.
They didn't promote you like in Office Space?
that would have been pretty crazy. Yeah. No, luckily they got the message. I didn't want to quit because I wanted a severance package. So they laid me off. They gave me a good severance package, and at that point I decided that that was a kind of good kick in the ass that I needed. I didn't want to have a job anymore. I didn't send out a single resume out. I had some pretty decent connections, and I was leaving a pretty reputable firm, so I could have landed on my feet pretty easily in New York, I think. But I just decided that I just didn't want to be in that world anymore. So I moved back to Virginia. And I actually, the time when I moved back to Virginia, I wasn't really 100% sure what I was going to do. I just knew I wanted to do something that has to do with real estate. And I wanted to call my own shots. And, I was 28. I didn't have a family. I didn't have responsibilities. I didn't have a lot of debt. It was actually a very easy situation to take a chance on, because I had that luxury of time. I had that luxury of not being under pressure to pay a lot of bills. I kind of got rid of all my expenses. I got rid of my expensive apartment in New York and all my fancy habits. And so I made some moves that kind of assured that I wasn't under pressure to make some bad decisions over a short term. And, I moved back to my hometown, and I started reading some courses online about wholesaling, about different strategies that people were using. And it also helped that the market crashed and you could go out and you could buy really, 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 really cheap deals. So it was a pretty good time to start in real estate. I mean, everybody else was running from the market and losing everything. And at the same time, it was a great opportunity to actually get in and buy, especially if your timeline was long, if you could afford to buy deals and hold them through as the market cycles up and rebounds.
No, very cool. Now, when you first started, did you start wholesaling in the beginning, or were you doing rentals, or did you, look into flipping? What were you first looking to do?
I did some wholesaling initially, but I didn't do a lot of it. I very quickly wanted to jump into buy and hold. I knew for a while that my goal was really to build an income producing portfolio of properties. I wasn't really interested in chasing deals that pay me one time, basically. And that's what wholesaling is. That's what rehabbing and flipping is. I did some flips, I did some wholesales, but I really just my goal was to replace my old corporate income with real estate. Monthly, whatever that monthly number that I was making in my old job, I wanted to replace it with cash flow from my properties.
How long did it take you to do that?
About 2 years. Took me about 2 years to replace my old corporate income. So yeah, not super fast, but pretty good. Within 2 years, I got to the point where I could, and I did, and I'd leave the country for a month at a time, and I go travel to Europe or Latin America, and my portfolio was producing the same income I used to make working 70 to 80 hours a week on Wall Street. So since then, I've just been focused on growing it.
How did you get going so fast? I mean, that's pretty quick. 2 years to replace your income from rental properties. Were you financing? I mean, with banks? How did you get so much income coming in?
Well, so what I started doing was I had one private lender, and I did have a little bit of cash on my own that I had saved from my previous job, but I primarily took one private lender, and the strategy was very simple. We'd go in, we'd buy property with cash, REO typically, renovate it, put a tenant into the property, get a lease in place, go to a local community bank, get the property reappraised, refinance into a semi-permanent loan, pull out the entire original investment that it took to buy and renovate the property, and then take that money, roll over to the next deal, and then to the next deal, and to the next deal. And again, it was easier to do then than it is now because the valuations have increased. But back then it was very easy to buy something for 50, put 20 into it, get it reappraised for 100, get an 80% LTV loan, pull out 75 after closing costs, and then rotate that into the next deal and next. So I essentially took like $100,000 and I turned it into a $3.5-4 million portfolio, with that $100,000 being pulled out and still sitting in the bank, ready for the next deal.
Right. No, that's awesome. How long did you have to wait to get the home appraised with that bank? Would they do it right away, or did you have to wait 6 months?
Well, because these are local community banks, they don't have seasoning requirements. You could never pull it off with a Fannie, with a conventional lender. Fannie or Freddie, they won't do it. You need 6 months seasoning. They have all sorts of stupid rules that would just make your head explode. I never deal with them. Local portfolio lenders, they don't have seasoning requirements. They're much easier to deal with. I could rehab a property, bring it to them within 60 days, and they let me refinance, because all they care about is cash flow. They care about debt coverage. They care about loan versus current value of the property. Seasoning is just not important to them. So that allowed me to rotate that money through deals pretty quickly.
I work with a portfolio lender too, but unfortunately they do have a seasoning requirement, my lender. But yeah, they'll give me multiple loans. Great to work with. What type of were you buying? Multifamily? Were you buying single family? What kind of houses or properties were you buying at that time?
Buying single families and duplexes. That's it. And again, it's a function of the market, right? The asset class that took the biggest hit, 2008, 2009, was single families. Single families, duplexes. That's where you had the most REO inventory. Easiest deals to go after. So now I'm more focused on multifamily, and I'm doing mixed use commercial development, among other projects. But back then that was the bread and butter deals, single families, duplexes, and also it was just a smart asset class to go after, because as the market rebounds, your single families are typically going to rebound the fastest.
Are you selling any of your properties now, or are you just holding everything still?
No, I'm still holding. I'm waiting probably another year or two until my portfolio gets to a certain size where I then start pruning. And I may regret that decision if interest rates start jumping and the market kind of levels out here. I may look back and say, man, I should have sold some of this stuff in 2015. But I'm okay. I'm okay with that. Everything is cash flowing. I really I'm still focused on growing. And at some point, I'm going to then rebalance my portfolio and take some properties that shouldn't be in that portfolio anymore. It's the 80-20 rule, right? You look at your portfolio and you say, there's a couple of things, right? A couple of ways you can apply the 80-20 rule. You say, what 20% of my properties are generating 80% of my headaches, right? And generating 80% of my maintenance calls, et cetera, et cetera. Let's prune those out. But you also look and say, well, what are some properties that are generating, that currently have the most equity in them, right? Because then you then start looking, you look at two things. You look at your cash flow, but then you also need to look at your return on your equity. So if you have two properties and they're both cash flowing, let's say $500 a month, but one has, let's say, $60,000 in equity in it, right? So that's 500 times 12. That's $6,000 a year in cash flow, 10% return on your equity, right? But the other property that has the same cash flow maybe has $200,000 in equity, right? So now you're cash flowing $6,000 a year, but that return on your equity is, what's 6,000 divided by 200?
Less than 5%.
Less than 5%, right? So that tells you that you're better off pulling that equity out and putting it into the market somewhere else. So you look at your portfolio and you say, where do I have the greatest equity sitting? And I'm not generating high enough return on equity. Let's prune those out and get rid of those and redeploy that money somewhere else. So there's a couple of different rebalancing things that you can be looking at.
Very cool. No, I like the way you think of that, not just how much cash you invested in those properties originally, but really, how much cash do you have tied up in them now if you were to sell them. Now, if you were to sell them, would you be exchanging those into other properties? Would you just be cashing out? Because I mean, obviously, there's going to be some tax consequences if you just sell your properties and don't end up exchanging them into anything else.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I may look at. I may look at 1031 exchanges. I may simply look at my loan resets, because a lot of my local commercial loans have 5-year calls on them. So I may be just taking that money and paying down some of my loans that are getting ready to reset soon. So it just depends on where we are in terms of a couple of different market scenarios.
Okay, cool. Did those loans, did they have balloon payments, or are they just ARMs that the interest rates could change on?
Some of them are ARMs, some of them are balloons. It depends on the lender. I do business with a couple of different banks, and they structure loans differently. But the general understanding is, even if something is a balloon, if I have a good relationship with that lender, and if I've been making my payments, we don't really expect them to call that loan. We're simply going to renegotiate the rate depending upon where the market is and reset it for another 5 years. So a lot of these are calls, but they end up being resets.
Okay, cool. And for the listeners who don't understand, a balloon, the bank, if you have a 5-year balloon payment, after those 5 years are up, the bank can call your loan due and make you pay it off, sell your property, whatever you have to do. Many times with an ARM, they may not have a balloon, but your interest rate can go up after those 5 years, but they can't make you pay the loan off.
Correct.
So, yep. Very cool. Now, you had the single families. You've built up. I'm curious, how many single family homes or duplexes do you own now?
I should know an exact number. about 50 properties.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. No, it's funny. Most of the people I interview, they don't know exactly how many properties they own either. So don't feel too bad.
Yeah, I used to know. It's right now what I have active is, I think, 60 units. And then I have another 70 units in development right now. Okay. So I'm really kind of ramping things up.
Yeah, no kidding. So lately you said, before you're buying mostly single family duplexes, have you been buying more multi-unit, larger complexes the last couple of years?
I'm developing some bigger projects now. So, I've been very selective. I think a lot of people focus on unit size, right? So, I mean, I know guys that went in a year or 2, 3 years and assembled hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of units, right? A lot of people focus on just how many units, but what they end up getting is a lot of kind of headache properties and high cash flow, high problem deals. So I've been very kind of selective about how I build my portfolio. And now what I'm doing is a lot of new construction. So I'm getting ready to build a 4-unit building, an 8-unit building. I've got plans I'm starting to put together now for 2 different mixed use projects that are going to be about 30,000 square feet each, with retail and commercial and office space and 25 apartments. So that's what I'm looking at now. I'm not really looking to buy existing properties because there's very few value add opportunities left in my market. And I really have no desire to buy something that's already cash flowing where I can't really build a lot of sweat equity. So I'm primarily transitioning into ground up development.
Oh, that's very cool. And are you planning to keep all of these? Or are you going to sell some of them? What's your plan with
those I'm going to keep. I mean, I'm also building about 8 different spec houses right now that I'm selling. So that's something else I've transitioned my business into, is I've just been buying land for the past 2 years, and some of it is good to build duplexes and 4-unit buildings on, but some of these lots aren't big enough. And so I'm building single family homes on them and selling them off. Breaking ground on 2 next week. I've got 4 going on right now that I'm more passively involved with, and that I just put up the land for. So yeah, I mean, I'm sort of evolving my business in a couple of different ways. I'm doing some active projects, but I'm also getting into some passive deals where I just buy the land and I turn it over to another builder. He's building houses on them. We share the profits when the houses are sold. So there's a couple of different kind of interesting pivots in my business.
Oh, that's very cool. Well, no, in many parts of the country, most parts of the country, the market's going crazy. It's really appreciating. I'm sure a lot of investors kind of thinking, is new construction a viable option? How can they get started? How hard was it for you to switch from rehabbing or, buying existing properties to move into new construction? How much was involved in making that switch?
There's really a couple of learning curve issues that once you get over, you realize that new construction is actually way better and easier than rehabbing, right? You need to learn zoning, and zoning is not something you typically need to understand when you're rehabbing, because you've got an existing structure in place. When you're doing new construction, you need to very diligently study your local zoning laws and understand what you can and can't build on a certain piece of land. And then new utilities and foundations. Once you figure that stuff out, once you're out of the ground with a foundation, new construction is a breeze. I'm at the point now where I refuse to do single family rehabs. I just won't do them anymore because it's not worth the time or the effort. So I'm only doing new construction. I just got done. I built 6 duplexes out of the ground. I added to my portfolio. I've got 4 or 5 more in the works right now, but it's quicker, it's cleaner, it's easier. Unless you're able to do rehabs where you can buy the existing structure for the cost of the land or far below replacement value, that's where it still makes sense to do rehabs, right? Mm-hmm. But if your market has appreciated to the point where you're not really getting good deals on rehabs anymore, just do new construction. And there's a couple of other sort of things at play. There's still a lot of people hunting for rehab projects, whereas a lot less people in my market are doing new construction. In some markets, people still aren't paying attention to infill lots. For the last couple of years, I've been able to pick up infill lots really cheap because people still weren't paying attention to them. So if you can get land for cheap, it makes sense to build on it, obviously. So it's market dependent. But for me, I won't rehab houses anymore. Just won't do it unless they steal something. And then it makes sense. But other than that, I won't do it. It's just not worth the trouble.
Right. No, it makes sense. I'm curious. So I'm sure when you're doing your rehabs before and renovations, you had a contractor connections and certain contractors you used. Were those same guys able to switch over into new construction, or did you look for new contractors, or did you go after specific builders when you're doing the new construction projects?
No, I ended up getting, for the most part, new subs. So, you've got guys that specialize in digging footers. You've got bricklayers that specialize in building foundations. I've got framers that all they do is new construction. We get lumber delivered to the site. I have, I can have a 2,500 square foot duplex up in 4 or 5 days, including roof trusses, right? Plumbers, electricians, you may be able to reuse them from your rehabs to your new construction projects, right? A lot of my rehab projects were gut renovations. So the same electrician that was doing my gut renovations and the same plumber can do my new construction projects, right? But, siding guys, roofing guys, depending upon their skill level, you may be able to switch them over from your rehabs to new construction. It just depends.
Right. No, that makes sense. And are you the one who's managing those subs, or do you have a rehab manager? How are you handling that situation?
I'm the general contractor on all my projects now. I'm in the process of hiring a project manager to come work for me full time. But until I do that, I'm the general contractor. Okay. So I'm finding, hiring, managing all the subs, and it's time intensive. But you're also saving 12, 15, 20% on your cost basis versus hiring a GC. It makes sense on lower margin projects.
For sure. Well, I did the same. I was managing all of my rehabs, and I couldn't keep up with the different things I was doing. I was having properties just sit there for months with no crews on them. So this summer, I hired one of my contractors to be my full-time project manager, manage all of that. And yeah, so far it's been so nice not dealing with all those issues.
Yeah, it's great. And ultimately, if you want to build a scalable business, that's what you've got to do. You've got to hire somebody to go out in the field for you. So beginning of this year, I hired a full-time property manager that works for me now. He does all my property management, leasing, deals with maintenance. I was waiting until my portfolio gets big enough to where I can afford to hire a full-time person. And as soon as I did, my life became infinitely easier. So now I'm doing the same thing on the project management side. And every time you do that, every time you make that hire, your business just grows big time because you have just freed yourself up to do the higher level functions of your business.
Oh yeah, I found the exact same thing. Every time it's scary to hire people, but it makes your life so much easier. It gives you so much more time.
You invest a few months and it becomes a time suck in those few months where you have to train them and get them up to speed. But then as long as you've hired the right person, after a few months, they should be able to do things on their own. And it's just a huge weight that's been lifted off your shoulders.
So you've got a lot of properties in the works. You've already got a huge portfolio. We talked a little bit about possibly selling off some in the next year. What are your long-term plans? Do you want to keep doing new construction? Are you trying to get to a certain amount and then relax? What do you see your future being?
I always joke with my buddies that kind of do the same thing as I, because we talk about that, like what's the end game and what's, and so I always joke and I say, well, when I get to like $100,000 a month in cash flow, I'll take a break. And it used to be a joke, but now I'm like, it's very realistic. So ultimately it's not about the dollar numbers, right? It's about lifestyle and it's about freedom. I'm a pretty simple guy. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in my 4-unit building that other 3 apartments cash flow and pay me to live here. And I don't need a huge mansion. I don't really buy fancy cars. So it's really not about the money. It's more about, how much of cash flow can I build to just never worry about anything for the rest of my life and still maintain a simple kind of chilled out lifestyle, right? So when the business gets to the point where it becomes a pain in my ass, I'm going to quit. Or where the portfolio starts stressing me out, I'm going to prune it. Long term, in terms of what I'm doing, in terms of deals, I want to do ground up mixed use development. I want to build communities. That's really, I think, where my long term passion is going to lie. Is I want to build, and I'm doing that on a small scale now. I just finished kind of redoing this one block here near where I live, where we put in a restaurant, we put in a bunch of apartments. I'm building single family houses to sell there. So now I'm gearing up for actually 2 different mixed use projects. They're going to have office space, maybe a restaurant, apartments. Long term, I want to do that on a bigger scale. I want to do multi-acre ground up development. I think because to me that's interesting, right? That to me I think that's something I can be really passionate about, is creating entire communities where people are going to live, work, play for the rest of their lives. So to me that's really interesting. And then in the meantime, I'll continue building an income producing portfolio as long as it makes sense and doesn't stress me out and doesn't cause me problems.
Oh, that's awesome. I have a question that maybe reminded me of when you're doing the mixed use and you're doing these residential and commercial buildings, but are you finding tenants for the mixed use before you commit to building it, or you just seeing a need for that in the area? How are you positioning yourself with the commercial tenants?
Well, so the one retail development I've done so far, I decided I was going to put a restaurant into this building, and I started renovating it. And during the rehab process, I hired a broker to go out and look for a restaurant tenant. So now this next mixed use development I'm doing, again, because I'm primarily going to put office space there, and it's really what I'm going to try to do is maybe do mostly co-working space with some dedicated office space. I'm just going to go ahead and build it. I'm not necessarily going to look for a tenant. I think if I was doing another restaurant project, I'd probably start looking for a potential restaurant tenant even before breaking ground. But I've always been despite the fact that I come from a very analytical background and I now produce analytical software, when it comes to business, I've always actually ended up being kind of a fire ready aim type of guy, where I just decide I'm going to do something and then I do it and I figure things out later. So I think it just depends on what kind of project I'm doing.
No, that's cool. I do things the same way. I like to plan and set things up for the future, but I don't like to plan too much. I like to just get going and figure it out. And speaking of your software, you created a software for real estate investors, for wholesalers, kind of flippers, even rental property owners. How did you first think of this idea? Did you see a need in the market? Did it just fit well with your background?
It fit well with my background. A lot of what I used to do in my corporate job was create really complex financial models. And so when I started investing in real estate, I started building out software for myself to use to determine what to pay for deals. One of the software I built when I was looking at buying whole deals was primarily to figure out, if I'm looking at a 10-unit apartment building, what's it going to cash flow? What's it going to look like 2-3 years from now? Can I put together some financials for my lender? Originally, it was all just for me, and I shared it with a couple of people, other investors, and they found it helpful. And I think at the time, I was really kind of focused on, hey, what can I do to create a second income stream for myself? What else am I good at? I think that's a question you should always be asking. People kind of start businesses off from almost the wrong sort of angle, right? For me, I asked, well, yeah, I want to maybe start a second business, but what is it that I can contribute to the world? What skill set, what special abilities do I possess that will allow me to do something that will really add value to people? And that was something that ended up resonating with some investors that I shared the software with. And that's how the business was born. Also in 2009, almost by accident. And I saw a need for a different type of software for wholesalers and people doing short-term deals and rehabbing and flipping. And that was the second software I created called Rehab Valuator. And since then, we've had over 100,000 people download and use that software. We have a free version and a paid version. Something that I kind of just didn't really think would go very far. I started almost as a kind of a side bet, maybe have a small second stream of income, turned into a pretty big monster at this point. And it's not really about how much we've sold or how much money we've made. It's really about how many investors we've helped at this point, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah, no, it really is. I've written a review on Rehab Valuator and I use it, and it really is. It's easy to use and it's very in-depth software. I really enjoy it, and I think it's a great system. And you're actually improving it now. You're taking it a step further with an online-based system, correct?
Yeah, I'm really very, very heavily reinvesting into the platform. I actually just got back from a meeting in New York with my developers, and I'm just the next round of development is going to cost 6 figures. I'm putting of my own money into it. But we're rolling out a web-based platform that will have the same capabilities as the software that we've been providing, but will have a lot more analytical deal marketing, deal sharing capability as well. So, the whole idea is for somebody to be able to plug in a deal really quickly, figure out what to pay for it, figure out what the return on investment is going to be for them or for their end buyer, and then very easily generate marketing materials for wholesale buyers or a separate set of marketing materials to show to a private lender, a hard money lender, maybe even a bank. There's really nothing like it out there, even though I'm pretty sure people have been trying to copy me for the past couple of years. Bigger Pockets is one of them. But we're really building on that platform and creating a place where people can do that, but can also then share their deals with other members, sell their deals on the site, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I can't even talk about some of the things that we're rolling out because we're still finalizing them. It'll be very exciting.
Very cool. No, that sounds, really awesome. And I'm excited to see what it looks like when you're finished with it. And it seems like so simple when you're using it as an investor, but you kind of don't realize how much goes into it on the development side and what it takes to bring something like that into reality. I'm sure it's a bigger process than you thought it was in the beginning as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's taken a huge amount of work.
Very cool. So you've got your Rehab Valuator. I'll have a link to that in the blog article about this podcast. You've got your rental properties, your development, your future development. When you got started, it's kind of a blessing that you were fired, kind of a planned laid off. For other people, looking to get started in real estate, maybe they're in the corporate world like you were. What's your advice for them to get started? Do you take it slow? Do you just kind of get your feet wet? Do you jump into it? How do you think the best way to get started investing is?
It's always a good idea to take an inventory, right? Take an inventory of your resources and what you have and don't have, right? What can you bring to the table, and then what do you need? Some people have money, they don't have time or knowledge. Well, they need to maybe find somebody to partner with that has a need for funding, has the knowledge and the time, right, but doesn't have the money. Maybe you're the opposite of that, right? Maybe you're sitting there and you hate your job, you really don't have any cash to invest, you really don't have a lot of resources. Well, education is out there. That's easy. Nobody's got any excuse not to have the knowledge, right? Real estate is not a complicated business. So you can gain the knowledge and maybe find somebody to partner with that can provide you with the financing, either the short-term cash, long-term cash, or maybe they can be a credit partner so you can go out and get some of the long-term financing from local lenders, right? Wholesaling, if you want to build up some cash, wholesaling is always a great way to go. There's a massive demand from cash buyers like me right now for deals, and we're no longer going to MLS. We're no longer really going to auctions for the most part. We're back to sourcing off-market deals, and we're either doing it ourselves or we're doing it. I'd much rather pay a wholesaler than have to send out my own yellow letters and put up bandit signs at 4:00 in the morning trying to avoid the police. So I'd much rather pay a wholesaler a $5,000-$10,000 fee if he brings me a good deal ready to go. So there's a massive demand in most markets I'm aware of from lots of cash buyers looking to get into deals. So if you learn how to wholesale, that's a great way that you can start with no money, very little resources, but build up some cash. And then redeploy that cash and build up a rental portfolio if that's what you want to do. Some people don't want to do that, right? That's the other thing that you need to take an inventory of is, what do you want your life to look like in 2, 3, 5 years, right? Because that vision may not include you owning a bunch of rental properties because they very well can be a huge pain in the ass, right? It takes a certain personality, it takes a certain resilience to deal with tenants, to deal with maintenance calls, to deal with turnover, right? To deal with leasing. None of that stuff is a walk in the park. So maybe your vision of your life doesn't include that, right? So you really need to take an inventory of your resources, what your strengths and weaknesses are, but also what you want your life to look like in a couple of years, and then go from there. But real estate is not a hard business. People tend to overcomplicate it. People tend to try to learn too many strategies or implement too many strategies at once. And if you figure out what you want your life to look like in a couple of years, you'll be able to narrow down which strategies you should be able to go after, which will then in turn narrow down what your education should be focused on right now. And that should make things a lot easier.
Yeah, no, you bring up some awesome points. I think one of the main takeaways I see and have learned, I see new investors who they want to wholesale, they want to flip, they want to buy rental properties, they want to become a real estate agent. They want to do it all at once. In the first year they get in the business and they don't do anything because they're so scatterbrained and trying to do everything at once. You really need to, like I said, pick one area, focus on that. And then maybe when you become an expert, you really have that dialed in, you can kind of move into the other areas. Maybe you become a wholesaler, then you start flipping once you're bringing in, $10,000 a month wholesaling or whatever it is, or you've got enough cash to buy rental properties. Then you can start buying some rental properties. But yeah, don't jump into everything at once.
Yeah, I see the same thing. People get scatterbrained. They just get scattered. Go deep, don't go wide. Nobody's ever become successful going really deep. Too many markets, too many strategies, too many deals. Become good at something. That's how you make money. Become good at one thing. When you become really good at that one thing, then you can expand and become good at the second thing.
Yeah. No, I tell people, if you're looking for an expert, if you're looking for someone to help you with any kind of service, do you want someone who's sort of good at that service and sort of good at 20 other things you don't need? Or do you want someone who's awesome at that one service you want and don't do anything else? I mean, you're going to hire the person who's awesome, that expert at the thing you need to do. You don't need someone who can do 20 things mediocrely. So, awesome points.
That's absolutely right.
Very cool. Well, I think that is all I had as far as questions. Great job. If people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way? Should they go to the Rehab Valuator site?
Yeah, that's really the best way. If you enter your name and email there's a free software that we give you, no strings attached, and that also puts you on my email list, and you'll start getting a few emails from me, and you'll be able to just reply to those emails and and reach me directly.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Daniil, I appreciate it. Great job. I really enjoyed learning how you've built up your portfolio and how you've moved into new construction, which I know is kind of a scary thing for many people, but you made it sound not quite so scary. So thank you for being on the show, and I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Sounds great, Mark. I really appreciate you having me on here. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.